The Exrathians had always prided themselves on their peaceful nature. Their civilization was built on science, art, and diplomacy. They had no need for weapons of war, for their technology was advanced enough to defend against the few threats that had ever come their way. Yet, nothing in their history had prepared them for the ferocity of the Shothran. The Shothran didn't conquer, they obliterated. Unlike other species who simply sought to expand or assimilate, the Shothran took no prisoners. Their ships were weapons of mass destruction, capable of decimating entire cities in moments. Their soldiers were brutal and relentless, showing no mercy to those who stood in their way. In their wake, planets were left in ruins, their ecosystems shattered, their populations exterminated. No one had ever stood against them for long. The Exrathians had hoped to negotiate. They had tried everything: diplomatic envoys, pleas for mercy, even offers of resources in exchange for peace. The Shothran had only laughed, their cold, alien eyes dismissing the Exrathians as weak, as insignificant. It had taken mere days for their forces to lay waste to the largest Exrathian cities, and within weeks, the once thriving planet was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. But even as their world burned, the Exrathians refused to give up. Their leaders met in secret, surrounded by the ruins of their cities, in a last-ditch effort to save their people. They knew that no force in the galaxy could stand against the Shothran, not alone, anyway. But their desperation led them to a decision they had hoped never to make. They would ask for help. The Exrathian Council, composed of the wisest and most respected leaders, devised a plan. A signal would be sent, broadcast across all known frequencies, across all known space, pleading for aid. Their message would be clear: we are the Exrathians. We are being slaughtered by the Shothran. We need help. Anyone who hears this, please, come to our aid. It was a desperate move, one that would signal their weakness to the galaxy, but it was the only option left. They worked through the night, using their last remaining resources to amplify the message, sending it out on every frequency, every wavelength they could. For hours, the signal pulsed out into the void of space, carrying their plea across the stars. The Exrathians didn't expect a reply. They didn't expect any aid to come. But it had to be done. The Shothran were too powerful, too merciless for any species to stand alone against. If someone, anyone, would come to help, then perhaps they could survive. Perhaps there was hope. As the message echoed across the cosmos, a quiet silence settled over the Exrathian capital. The city was nothing but ruins now, a hollow shell of what it had once been. Yet, even in their darkest hour, the Exrathian people clung to a fragile hope that somewhere, someone might hear their cry for help. And perhaps, just perhaps, that someone would be the salvation they so desperately needed. The vastness of the galaxy made the chances of anyone hearing the Exrathian plea a distant hope, a faint whisper among the stars. Yet, as the days passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The signal, once sent with a trembling hope, now spread through the vast network of interstellar communication. It bounced off relay stations, passed through communications hubs, and reached far-flung systems that had never interacted with the Exrathians. The galaxy had its share of powerful species, each with their own agendas. Some, like the peaceful Trelvans, would have willingly offered aid, had they not been embroiled in their own conflict with the aggressive Nuther Combine. Others, such as the Zhorka, a war-hungry species known for their brutal mercenaries, might have been tempted to capitalize on the chaos, but the Shothrans' relentless destruction discouraged most from intervening. And then there were the stories. The name humanity began to surface once again, carried by those who had encountered them, or rather, survived them. The legends were told in hushed tones, and the more they were passed around, the more a sense of dread began to settle over those who heard them. These weren't just stories of warriors or conquerors. No, humanity was something far more terrifying, something unrelenting. The first mention of humans was a passing remark made by an old merchant who had once visited the fringes of human space. He spoke of an ancient war between the humans and a species known as the Dracs, a war that had lasted decades. According to the merchant, the Dracs were technologically superior and had assumed their victory was inevitable. Yet by the time the war ended, the Dracs were a shattered empire, and humanity stood triumphant. And that wasn't all. The stories told of human forces wiping out entire fleets without breaking a sweat, outthinking enemies at every turn, and adapting to impossible situations. But most chilling of all was the most recent tale. A distant outpost had been attacked by an alien force, one that was far more advanced than the Dracs. The human response. A mere 3 ships had obliterated the invaders without a single loss. It was this growing reputation that made the Exrathian message find its way into the right ears. The most feared species in the galaxy, the one whispered about in fear, might just be the only hope. For the first time in centuries, a council of galaxy leaders convened. The Trelvans, the Zhorka, the Ixians, and a dozen others gathered, each deeply aware of the Shothran's might, but each also haunted by the rumors of humanity's power. The question was asked again and again, should we call them? At first, there was hesitation. There was fear of drawing the ire of a species that had never been fully understood. Humanity was unpredictable, and their methods were unknown. But as time passed, the stories became undeniable. The Shothran, powerful as they were, could not be allowed to stand unchecked. And if there was a chance, no matter how small, that humanity could answer the call, then the galaxy might have a chance at survival. The message was transmitted. We are the Exrathians. We are under attack by the Shothran. Our people are being slaughtered. We plead for help. Anyone who can hear this. The signal, once a faint whisper, was now amplified and sent through the galaxy's most secure channels. It was a desperate gamble. For the first time, the galaxy held its breath. The galaxy's leaders waited. Days stretched into weeks, and still there was no response. The Exrathians, who had held on to the fragile hope that their message might bring aid, now began to prepare for their final stand. Their cities, already in ruin, were all but defenseless, and they braced for the inevitable crushing blow from the Shothran. Every attempt to repel the invaders had failed, and the thought of humanity coming to their rescue seemed like an impossible dream. But then, something changed. The first signs were subtle. A small, unexplained anomaly in the Exrathian communications network, like the faintest flicker of static among the noise of endless broadcasts. It wasn't much, but to those who had been waiting for any sign, it was enough. Then, a shift in the Shothran fleet's activity. A new presence had appeared on their scanners. The Shothran were not known for their strategic retreat, but now they seemed uncertain. On the outer rim of Exrathian space, just beyond the shattered remains of their once great cities, a fleet materialized. The ships were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They moved with unnerving precision, forming a perfect formation that could only be described as purposeful. There was no fanfare, no flashy display of power, just the quiet, inexorable march of ships moving closer to the Exrathian homeworld. The Exrathian leaders watched with a mix of disbelief and awe. There was no time to analyze, no time to question who these ships belonged to. The message had been sent, and now, it seemed someone had answered. The human ships were sleek, dark, and silent. They looked like shadows against the backdrop of the stars. At first glance, they appeared almost primitive in design, a far cry from the sleek, luminous behemoths of the Shothran. But there was a cold, calculated efficiency to them, an eerie calmness in their movement that made the Exrathians feel uneasy. These weren't ships built to show off their power. No, these ships had been built for something else, something far more dangerous. The Shothran, too, noticed the fleet's arrival. The commanders of the Shothran warships grumbled in irritation, dismissing it at first. They had faced alien forces before. Why should this be any different? Yet, as the fleet approached, they saw the human ships move into position with unnerving coordination. Something wasn't right. They had never encountered an enemy that didn't flee at the sight of their massive forces, but these ships didn't hesitate. They didn't turn tail. A transmission was sent from one of the human vessels. It was brief, simple, and to the point. "This is humanity. Stand down." The Shatharan commanders, used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, were momentarily confused. No grand threat, no promise of destruction. Just a calm, direct statement that made them feel uncomfortable. The leader of the Shatharan fleet responded, dismissing the humans as little more than an irritant. "Destroy them," came the order. But as the Shatharan prepared to unleash their devastating firepower, something strange began to happen. The human ships, moving with an almost uncanny precision, dodged every attack. The Shatharan's weapons, so powerful and deadly, simply passed through empty space. The humans didn't even fight back, yet it was clear they were completely unfazed. The first shockwave from the human fleet tore through the Shatharan's ranks, sending their ships scattering. It wasn't an explosion, but a simple, elegant strike that sent the message loud and clear. This was not a battle they could win. The Shatharan's confidence faltered. The galaxy's most feared force was now confronted by an unknown power, and for the first time in their existence, they were left questioning their own superiority. The Shatharan had faced countless foes over the centuries, yet they had never encountered anything like this. Their ships, massive and imposing, were designed to decimate entire fleets with overwhelming firepower. They had crushed the mightiest of civilizations, and their reputation for ruthlessness had struck fear into the hearts of every species in the galaxy. But the humans were different. As the Shatharan launched their first wave of attacks, they expected the human ships to scatter, to flee before the sheer force of their weapons. The Shatharan fleet unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, railguns, and missiles, all aimed at the human vessels. The air crackled with the fury of the assault. But then, nothing happened. The human ships simply glided through the storm of weaponry as though they were made of shadows, evading every shot with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. The Shatharan commanders were momentarily stunned. How could this be? They had calculated everything. Their weapons should have torn through the humans' hulls with ease, but the humans did not retreat, nor did they break. They simply moved, adapting, responding in ways that baffled the Shatharan. And then the humans struck back. The first attack came from a single human ship, a sleek, black vessel that had been sitting quietly in the midst of the chaos. Without warning, the ship fired a beam of energy so precise and intense that it tore through one of the Shatharan destroyers in an instant. The Shatharan ship didn't explode in a burst of flame and debris. It simply collapsed in on itself, its shields failing with a dull hiss as the energy beam sliced through its defenses. A stunned silence filled the space around the battlefield. The Shatharan had never seen anything like this. Their ships were considered invulnerable to most weapons, yet this human ship had pierced through them, as though they were made of paper. It wasn't brute force. No, this was something far more calculated, far more precise. The second wave of attacks came quickly, another barrage of strikes from several human ships. This time, the Shatharan weren't so confident. Their ships tried to retaliate, but the humans' movements were too swift. They responded with uncanny precision, targeting weak points in the Shatharan vessels with devastating accuracy. Where the Shatharan relied on overwhelming force, the humans seemed to rely on something far more deadly: strategy. In the span of minutes, the Shatharan fleet, once vast and powerful, was already starting to crumble. The human ships, small in comparison but infinitely more agile and clever, were cutting through the Shatharan ranks with ruthless efficiency. Every move the Shatharan made was countered before they even had a chance to adapt. It was a game of chess, and the humans were playing with a masterful hand. The Shatharan commanders began to panic. This was not a race they could win. They had never been forced to think in such terms before, to question the very foundation of their might. The humans didn't fight like anyone else they had ever encountered. They didn't rely on sheer numbers, nor did they overwhelm their enemies with firepower. Instead, they struck with precision, with timing, and with an intelligence that seemed impossible for their foes to grasp. Desperation began to seep into the Shathran leadership. The more they fought, the more they realized they were not just facing another adversary. They were facing an opponent who had mastered the art of war in ways they could not comprehend. And still, the humans pressed on, calmly dismantling the Shathran's confidence, their forces, and their will to fight. The Shathran had underestimated their enemy, and now they were beginning to feel the full weight of their mistake. The Shathran had always prided themselves on their superior technology and overwhelming strength. For centuries, they had annihilated species that had dared to challenge them. But now, as their fleets scattered and their best-laid plans crumbled under the humans' relentless precision, they were forced to question everything they knew about warfare. The battle had quickly turned into something unrecognizable to them. Where once they dominated with brute force, they were now caught in a web of tactics so intricate, so flawless, that they could hardly keep up. The humans didn't simply fight. They calculated. Every maneuver was deliberate, every strike carefully planned. There was no waste of energy, no unnecessary movements. The humans were surgical in their attacks, hitting exactly where it would hurt the most, and they did so with the kind of efficiency that unnerved even the most hardened Shathran officers. At first, the Shathran commanders had assumed they could overwhelm the human ships with sheer numbers. Their colossal warships were powerful, designed to decimate entire fleets with the press of a button. But the humans didn't rely on brute strength. They used the terrain of space, the environment around them, to their advantage. They didn't just dodge fire. They anticipated it, calculating the exact trajectory of every projectile, and moving in perfect harmony with the battlefield. The Shathran's attacks, no matter how many or how powerful, simply missed. One of the human ships, a sleek vessel known as the Vigilance, had been taking fire from 3 Shathran warships. The Shathran had assumed the human ship would be overwhelmed by their concentrated barrage. Instead, it maneuvered in a way that no one thought possible. The Vigilance flew into the path of a plasma burst, using it as cover to shield itself from the other incoming shots, then used the shockwave to propel itself at an angle the Shathran hadn't anticipated. In a flash, the ship fired its main weapon, targeting the exposed weak point of the Shathran command ship. The shot hit dead center, tearing through the vessel's shield and cracking its core in a matter of seconds. The Shathran commander watched in disbelief as his flagship spiraled into the void. How could this happen? Their technology was superior. Their ships were invincible. And yet, they had been outmaneuvered by a fleet of ships that seemed to read the battlefield like a strategy game. The humans didn't just react to attacks. They planned for them. They set traps, baited their enemies, and used psychological warfare with a level of precision that sent shockwaves through the Shathran leadership. The human ships didn't just destroy. They toyed with their enemies, leading them into mistakes, making them second-guess their own decisions. Every time a Shathran commander thought they had a strategy that would work, the humans flipped the script and adapted faster than they could counter. It was clear now. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And they weren't interested in fighting a fair battle. They were interested in ending it as swiftly and decisively as possible. The Shathran tried to adapt. They began to concentrate their firepower into more direct assaults, hoping to overwhelm the humans with raw firepower. But it was too late. The humans had already anticipated their next move, and the Shathran fleet began to fall apart piece by piece. The more the Shathran pressed forward, the more they were drawn into the trap the humans had set. The Exrethians, watching from their dying homeworld, could scarcely believe what they were seeing. The once feared Shathran were being driven back by an opponent they had underestimated. They had sent out a call for help in desperation. And now, humanity had answered with more than they could have imagined. The Shathran were not a species accustomed to failure. For centuries, they had been the apex predators of the galaxy, their reputation and power unrivaled. But now, in the face of humanity's unyielding tactics, they were unraveling. Their once unshakable confidence was replaced by frustration, fear, and a desperate need to reclaim control. They had underestimated their enemy, and the cost was becoming apparent. The Shathran High Command convened in their flagship, the Judicator, orbiting the dying Exrathium world. Their faces, cold and unreadable, betrayed nothing of the panic that simmered just beneath the surface. The humans had caught them off guard, turned their own strategies against them, and shattered the Shathran fleet piece by piece. But there was still hope, at least that's what they told themselves. "Activate the Obsidian Protocol," barked General Kor, the leader of the Shathran fleet. His voice was firm, but there was a tremor of uncertainty in it. The Obsidian Protocol was a last resort weapon, an ancient Shathran design capable of turning the tide of any battle. It was devastating, its energy output unparalleled. But its use came with a heavy cost. It would burn through their resources and could even destroy their own forces if not carefully controlled. "Are you certain, General?" asked one of his officers. "We've never tested this against a fleet of this scale, and we risk annihilating our own ships." General Kor turned to face the officer, his eyes narrowing with cold intensity. "We either destroy them here, or we lose everything. There is no choice. Activate the protocol." And so, with grim determination, the Shathran began to prepare their ultimate weapon. It was a device that could unleash a catastrophic wave of energy, disintegrating everything in its path. If the humans were so adept at dodging attacks, this weapon would ensure that not even their evasive maneuvers could save them. It would level the playing field, if only for a moment. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, humanity's forces remained calm. The humans were aware of the shifting tides. Their intelligence had intercepted communication regarding the activation of the Obsidian Protocol, and they knew what was coming. The Vigilance, the flagship of the human fleet, remained at the forefront, its hull glinting in the distant light of dying stars. "We know what they're planning," Captain Alina Reeves, commander of the Vigilance, said, her voice calm but urgent. "But we're not going to let them have the first move. Set course for intercept. All ships, prepare for evasive action. We need to buy time." The human fleet responded with swift coordination. The strategy was simple yet effective. If they could delay the activation of the Obsidian Protocol long enough, they might be able to take down the Shathran flagship and destroy the weapon before it could fire. But it was a risk. The weapon, once deployed, would decimate everything within a vast radius. It was humanity's most dangerous gamble yet. With precision, the human ships darted forward, splitting into smaller formations to confuse the Shathran sensors. They closed in on the Judicator, dodging the incoming fire from the remaining Shathran ships. The tension was palpable as the humans moved closer and closer, but the Shathran had no intention of letting them reach their target. The Shathran began their countdown. Every second brought them closer to unleashing the Obsidian Protocol's devastating power. Time was running out for the humans, and if they failed to stop it, the battle would be lost. But Captain Reeves, eyes focused and hands steady, knew there was no turning back. This was the moment. The humans would either emerge victorious, or the galaxy would face a new kind of destruction. The countdown for the Obsidian Protocol echoed across the Shathran fleet, its cold mechanical voice a constant reminder that time was running out. Seconds felt like hours as the Shathran pressed the final button to activate the weapon. General Kor stood at the heart of the Judicator's command bridge, his knuckles white on the armrests of his seat. The weight of the decision rested heavily on his shoulders. He could feel the pulse of the countdown like a heartbeat, and with each passing second, his hope for victory grew more fragile. At the same time, Captain Alina Reeves watched the same clock, but hers was one of calm resolve. Her fingers danced across the controls of the Vigilance, her crew following her every command without hesitation. She knew that stopping the Obsidian Protocol was the only way to win. If it fired, everything they had fought for would be reduced to nothing. Every sacrifice, every strategy, lost in a single moment of destruction. "We don't have much time," Alina said, her voice cutting through the noise of the bridge. "All ships, move in. Focus on the Judicator. We're going to overload their defenses and buy us a window to disable the Obsidian Protocol." The human fleet moved as one, like a well-oiled machine. Ships zipped through the battlefield with incredible precision, weaving through Shothran fire. The Shothran, desperate to stop them, opened fire with everything they had. Their massive cannons unleashed destructive bursts of energy, but the human fleet, agile and swift, dodged with astonishing ease. They weren't just trying to destroy. They were weaving a dance, pulling the Shothran ships into positions where they would be ineffective. Every move had a purpose, every formation carefully designed to outmaneuver the Shothran's brute force. The Vigilance led the charge, its sleek form cutting through the chaos of the battlefield as it approached the Judicator. General Kor watched helplessly as the human flagship advanced. He knew that once the humans got close enough, the Obsidian Protocol would be at risk. His fingers hovered over the control pad for the final activation, but he hesitated. His fleet was crumbling, his flagship under assault. The humans were too close now. He had no choice. "Activate the protocol," Kor barked. The air in the Judicator's command center grew tense as the weapon's final systems were engaged. A surge of energy crackled throughout the Shothran fleet, the power for the Obsidian Protocol building at a terrifying pace. The weapon was ready to fire, but Captain Reeves was faster. In a brilliant, calculated move, she gave the order to launch a concentrated burst of electromagnetic interference directly at the Judicator's command center. The Vigilance fired its main weapon, a sharp beam of energy designed not to destroy but to cripple. It struck the heart of the Judicator's weapon systems, just as the Obsidian Protocol was about to fire. The result was instantaneous. The Judicator shuddered, its energy reserves rippling in an uncontrolled cascade. The Obsidian Protocol's power flared out of control, triggering a massive internal explosion that tore through the heart of the flagship. The shockwave from the explosion sent a ripple through the surrounding Shothran fleet, causing several ships to go dark as their systems were overloaded by the burst of energy. The Judicator, the symbol of Shothran might, was now little more than a burning husk drifting in space. The remaining Shothran ships faltered. Their fleet had been decimated by the humans' sheer tactical brilliance. What had started as a massive, overwhelming force had turned into a panicked, scattered mess. The humans, sensing victory, closed in. Their ships concentrated their fire on the vulnerable Shothran vessels, finishing what they had started. In the midst of it all, General Kor stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the fading image of his flagship. The battle was lost. His fleet was shattered, and with it, the Shothran's iron grip on the galaxy was slipping. Alina's voice came through the comms, calm yet full of finality. "It's over. The Shothran are beaten." As the last of the Shothran ships disintegrated into nothingness, the human fleet held steady, silent for a moment in the aftermath. The Exrethians, watching from the shattered remnants of their homeworld, could scarcely believe what had just transpired. The humans had done what seemed impossible. They had shattered the Shothran Empire and brought an end to their reign of terror. The galaxy was changing, and humanity, once thought of as insignificant, had shown that it was anything but. The last remnants of the Shothran fleet drifted silently in the vastness of space, a testament to their empire's fall. The once feared invaders, whose name had struck terror into countless species across the galaxy, were now nothing more than a shadow of their former selves. The remnants of their ships lay in pieces, drifting like forgotten relics. The battle was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. Captain Alina Reeves stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, her hands clasped behind her back, as she gazed at the wreckage on the viewscreen. Her crew was silent, each of them processing the magnitude of what had just transpired. It had been a gamble, a dangerous, impossible mission. And against all odds, they had succeeded. "We did it," Lieutenant Walker said softly, breaking the silence. "We actually did it." Alina nodded, her expression unreadable. We did, but the real work is just beginning. Across the galaxy, the news of the Shothran defeat spread like wildfire. The Exrathians, their homeworld in ruins, watched in awe as humanity's victory was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. The message was clear. The Shothran were no longer the apex predators. The galaxy was free of their terror, and it was humanity that had brought about that freedom. But Alina knew the galaxy was far from being healed. The fall of the Shothran Empire left a vacuum, and history had shown that power abhorred a vacuum. Other factions would rise to take their place, eager to claim the power that the Shothran had once held. The humans had proved they could fight, but what would happen when the next threat arrived? The Exrathian leaders, humbled and deeply grateful, reached out to humanity, seeking to form alliances in the wake of the battle. Though their once proud civilization had been shattered, the Exrathians had valuable knowledge, resources, and technology. With humanity's help, they might rebuild, but it would be a long road. We're not done yet, Alina said, turning away from the view screen. We need to help the Exrathians. They've lost everything, but they're not without value. We can teach them, show them how to rebuild. The crew nodded, recognizing the weight of her words. Humanity hadn't just won a battle, they had become the new leaders of the galaxy. The responsibility was enormous, and as Alina gazed out at the stars, she knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But humanity, for the first time in history, had proven that it could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest powers in the galaxy. The victory against the Shothran was a turning point, and it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same again. The Shothran had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, had opened the door for a new era. We'll help them rebuild, Alina continued, her voice steady and resolute. But we also need to prepare for what comes next. We've shown the galaxy what we can do, but now we must show them that we are more than just soldiers. We are leaders, diplomats, and survivors. Our strength lies not just in our ability to fight, but in our ability to unite. The human fleet turned toward the Exrathian homeworld, ready to aid in their recovery. Yet in the back of Alina's mind, she couldn't help but wonder, what else is out there? The Shothran had been the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced, but they were not the only threat. Humanity had just begun its journey into the galaxy's future. As the Vigilance cruised toward the remnants of the Exrathian capital, the stars stretched endlessly before them. The battle for the galaxy was far from over. The Shothran were gone, but new challenges awaited on the horizon. Humanity had proven it could rise to meet them. And as Alina gazed into the void, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. The galaxy had been changed, but the future was still theirs to shape.